or I can show it on mine. Okay. So we last met on May 21st for our quarterly, and I'm going to cover the same scope of presentation items for projects, covering the 3 major projects as part of the overall eCourts program. As you know, this is a major transformation of our operations and processes and modernization and digitization effort, as well as the replacement of our major applications with Tyler Technologies off-the-shelf products. I have 15 minutes. I'm going to have to really move quickly, and we'll try to net it out. What I am going to try to do is to bridge from our May meeting to give you a bridge, because I know some of you haven't been involved in this day to day. So I will try to bridge. What I will do for each topic is go through the major progress made by the AOC and judicial branch, as well as Tyler and our external agencies, and then highlight a couple key risks and issues as we go through the progress. And then finally, really talk looking ahead for the next 3 months on what our next big next step is. So just to summarize, we've accomplished a lot in the last 3 months, as you'll see when I go through the pitch. Much more ahead. I'm very excited to say that you're going to see our first product launch as part of our branch's eCourts initiative and access to justice. You'll see a demo at the end of this meeting. But first, I want to cover the overall eCourts program timeline. Cindy, if you could move to the next chart, please. Okay, and this includes the 3 major projects, and we reviewed this chart in governance back in May, and what I'm presenting is the chart that I presented to the AOC Exec Steering Governance on August 5th. And I'll start left to right. First, starting with Guide and Print, which we're going to brand as Guide and File for all our communication. As we shared in May, we fast-tracked a project as part of the ICMS project to address, immediate electronic solution and remote services needs for that we're going through with COVID-19, as well as provide access to courts and assistance to citizens in need. I'm very pleased to say that we will deliver this project on time, and not only deliver it on time, but we're going to deliver an additional 6 new case types to what we covered 3 months ago with absolute divorce and probate. I'll discuss a little bit more on the next slide, and again, we have the demo at the end. The other major project is Brazos. Brazos is the project to replace eCitation. Back in May, we showed that we're going to do an early summer pilot for Brazos with 5 different law enforcement agencies. You can see that this chart is reflecting a date move to the fall question mark. The question mark really relates to a very specific issue that we've had, and I'll cover a little bit more detail on it on the next slide. The reason why it's a question mark is our resolution of getting a legal agreement with the DOT DMV agency is unknown, and the importance of the resolution is that this DMV data feed is required for law enforcement when they do lookups when they're issuing a citation. The delays in the MOA resolution have resulted in a day-for-day slip in the pilot. Also, it will result in impacting our statewide rollout. The bigger risk is a cascading impact on the 2021 deliverables. I can say that as far as the next step, Commissioner Jessup and Director Wooten have been involved, and I'll cover a little bit more issue on the MOA issue in the next slide. Next, I shared back in May that we were going to work on fitting in the NC-aware replacement project timeline from a scope, resource, and timeline point of view. Ahead of back in last May, we had just received a high-level timeline and strategy from Tyler Technologies. Over the last 3 months, we've worked 6 iterations of building the project plan. We do have a plan to close this TBD date, and I'll briefly cover that after I go through the ICMS status. And then moving to the far right of the chart, you can see the ICMS Track 1 go live for the 4 pilot counties, all case types. This remains on track for first half of 2021, as we've shared over the past year and since we signed the contract. For close to a year, we've managed internally execution of a plan date of project plan of early March. We knew that we were going to insert 2 other projects, the Brazos and NC-aware replacement. And with the insertion of those projects, we knew that we were going to move the March to a later date. And we've worked to develop a very solid project plan, and we'll have a go live now of June 7th, which remains in our first half 2021 commitment. So come back to the plan to close the TBD date and also remove the tentative from the program timeline. We have 3 key steps that we're working to close by the end of this month. One is to close and finalize the NC-aware project plan, to close not only the Brazos pilot, but the statewide rollout date, and then finalize some remaining details on the ICMS project plan. And then for the next 3 weeks in September, we're going to work to address some potential resource and overlay task conflicts. We do know we're going to have some challenges with training as well as testing, more than likely in the beginning of the year 2021 timeframe. And then to close out the plan, we'll take it through our management system with the executive reviews and interlock with Tyler at the end of September, and then having a governance review the first week of October with our eCourts steering committee. So moving to the next slide, and I'm just going to briefly go through each of the 4 key projects we have: guide and file, Brazos, which is e-citation replacement, the NC-aware replacement, and then ICMS. I have a separate chart. For guide and file, and just a reminder, this project's aimed at providing and preparing court documents that the file for certain case types, and it's really to help a citizen answer online questions using a TurboTax approach, creates legal documents, and then the documents need to be printed to be filed with the clerk of courts. After this interview is done, it will give the person next step instructions on what to do with the forms and how the court process works. As we covered back in May, we were looking at absolute divorce and probate. We've added 6 other case types with adult name changing, domestic violence, protective order, motion claim, exempt property, petition proceed as indigent, small claims, and some summary ejectment. The rollout as the next step is very soon. Our plan is to roll this out in the month of August. We have a soft launch for a week, and then we'll have a public launch a week later. Next bullet is browsers. In May, we covered 4 key items that were focus areas. 1 was an aggressive schedule. 2 was we just entered testing. 3, a COVID-19 issue, and then lastly, an issue with DMV. So I'll start with the last issue, and that's the DOT DMV issue. We previously covered that we were in the process of a security review with the DOT agency to pass DMV data to Brazos, as well as other projects. And we needed to close on an interface memo of agreement between the branch and DOT. The importance is, as I covered, earlier, the data lookup is critical for a law enforcement officer when they have a stop and need to issue a citation. This is really critically important data. I am happy to say that the 2+ month security review that we did with DOT and with Tyler, we were able to close that a week after our last meeting, and it was a very good, valued effort with DOT's security team. Also, I view it as an important program milestone. It was a very good team-based effort, and I think we found the security review as a very good exercise. With that said, and however, since the end of May, we've really not progressed in closing the memo of agreement. And this is a formal memo of agreement for the exchange and the use of records between DOT DMV and AOC. Not contributing to some of the progress has been some of the COVID-19 working from home issues, as well as some availability. Just as recently as yesterday, our AOC legal met with the DOT legal and had a meeting yesterday. And the most recent status as of 90 minutes ago is that we have sent a revised draft document agreement to DOT, but we are still haggling over some details and terms. The DPPA, which is the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, has been one sticking point, as well as the whole red line process with the remote work. Our AOC legal perspective is that we are close. We do have a few terms to negotiate, and the lawyers are handling it. I don't have any specific details on the remaining issue from Wednesday, but we do have a meeting later this afternoon. The other major item that we talked about in the last meeting was COVID-19. COVID-19 is not only a Brazos issue and a risk that we identified back on March 4th, but an overall eCourts issue and risk that we've been working to mitigate and to resolve challenges associated, like much of the branch. We've seen some productivity improvements, with moving Webex to Webex, and some challenges with team members that have had to deal with remote education. Our communication channels have changed. Some of the face-to-face discussions have been replaced with newer technologies that the team has moved to for collaboration. We've moved to collaboration tools with Tyler, as Tyler is not traveling. And finally, we've been very sensitive to all the stresses the pandemic has caused. So we continue to work through it. For Brazos, we are going to do some remote training. The installation process will be a little bit different, and we'll reduce some of the deployment speed that we have. But overall, the team is working to address the COVID-19 risk and issue. And then finally, for Brazos, testing and aggressive schedules. Back in May, we had just started testing, and just to highlight that we have 3,300 tests, of which we've executed 73% successfully. The DMV interface is a big blocker for successful execution. We haven't entered a pilot, but glass half full, we have spent another additional 13 weeks of testing. And some of the law enforcement agencies have been a key part of our testing effort. So we have done a pre-pilot of sort, but we do need the pilot because we do need the to have an officer in their cabin and car and use the solution in their local environment, and so the pilot is very, very important. And then finally, on Tyler contract deliverables, in May we had no real milestones signed. We've had 6 deliverables signed. We only have 1 late, and that's the go live transition plan. Moving to NC-aware replacement. In May, we talked about timeline, solution scope, resources, kind of covered timeline earlier. From a solution, I just want to remind everyone that NC-aware replacement is going to get deployed in all 100 counties of the state of North Carolina. It's going to be replaced by 2 Tyler modules, 2 Tyler products. One product's a new product called eCourts, and that's effectively to get requests in for criminal process initiation. And then the second product is Odyssey, which we've been working on for the last year, and that's really to have the magistrates initiate the first steps of case management, and then after that we'll print things out as we've done in the past. I'm happy to say over the last 3 months we've had a lot of magistrates, law enforcement, and others that have given some usability feedback to Tyler as they shape their product. Those meetings have been really outstanding. We've had great participation from the branch and law enforcement to give feedback on the future product.
Matt, this is Jennifer Harjo. I'm sorry. Is this a good time to interrupt, or is this not a good time to interrupt about that issue? I don't know.
Sure.
I just had a question, and it's just about the NC-aware replacement. NC-aware is something that the public defender office or attorneys have not had access to unless they were part of the district attorney's office. So my question was, is there going to be any evaluation about making that software available as far as for informative purposes, available to public defender offices or others? I guess what I'm talking about is just to make sure, for instance, see if our clients have warrants elsewhere outstanding. So when we resolve a case, we can make sure that warrants are resolved everywhere as opposed to just in one location, or just to find information for information purposes, I guess. So
yeah, and Jennifer, I know you raised this question in the last meeting, we're still working the development of the product, and as the configuration of the product gets solidified, we will seek guidance from our Office of General Counsel, and where access is appropriate, we would configure access based on a role. So it's really there's really no change in status, but it's really it relates to both the configuration of the product and the ability to do that, and also we would seek guidance from our Office of General Counsel.
It may be appropriate that that get referred to the Office of General Counsel to address whether, if it has not already been, that they start looking into the legal implications of that, because it's not clear that access would fit in the framework of the statute. So I do think it might be a good idea for them to look at it.
Okay. We'll log that, Lauren. And I know I'm running a little bit over, but there's a lot to cover, unfortunately. So for NC-aware replacement, we've progressed to focus on PDD solutions, which is really the precursor for Tyler starting development. Yesterday we signed our first one, so good progress. Also, we've kicked off over the last month work scope for conversion, external integration, and internal integration for NC-aware replacement. So those areas have their work scope being defined jointly with Tyler. We should be able to reuse some of the work that was developed for ICMS. And then finally, we don't have any draft contract deliverables from Tyler yet, which is a concern. So we'll move to the next slide. And then just the final area of resources. And going back to the previous slide, we've been working resource
so
issues.
last time it was giving me, hold on.
So we've been working resource issues throughout the program. For this large of a program, this is usually a risk area or an issue that you have to work. I did highlight as the next big step that in September we'll have a major effort to look across all three programs and look at resource. The only thing I might point out that is a major resource risk for the entire program is we have been working with some additional new work with COVID-19 actions. Additionally, we've seen some statute changes that have pulled some people off the core program with Second Chance Act, and there's other work such as redistricting. So all those things we're working to address. Now I can move to the next slide. ICMS. This is a slide you've seen since the very first presentation of governance. Our governance continues on ICMS. Right now, 6 of the 9 work streams are green, performing as planned. We have a couple implementation, integration, conversion, or yellow, where we have issues or risks exist. Guide and file would be a green. Brazos, as we covered earlier, is a red because we do have an issue that exists that impacts project delivery. As far as configuration, just moving to the top, we've had some reporting workshops that have executed. That has moved into sprint activity as well as forms. Next steps down the road, we're going to have some configuration done with the Tyler development that we get delivered by the end of the year. And then we have some local config in the counties, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a later presentation. From development and integration, a lot of progress, and it's been mostly focused on these documents called PDDs. The only thing that you can really, the importance of a PDD is in order for Tyler to start development on customization for North Carolina, we have to sign off on 2 sets of documentations. Last May, we had 5 for app development signed off. Today, we have 19, with a handful left. Last May, we had 0 signed in integration development. Today, we have 15, with a dozen left, but half of those dozen are reports. From a next step point of view, we need to close this work by September 11th. I am pleased to say that we did sign a PCR, which is a formal program agreement with Tyler that they would deliver the majority of their development by year end, which is a very, very key agreement and milestone for the project. Any major risk with some of the development integration, as you've heard earlier, we've had a challenge with the DOT agency in closing the memo of agreement. We have 10 more executive branch agencies that we have to close MOAs, and then we have a number of law enforcement agreements that we need to sign. From a deliverable point of view, great progress. We signed off on a infrastructure design deliverable in the last 3 months. We have 2 late contract deliverables, the PDDs and development status report, but we have a path to close both of those. And then next, conversion. Last May, we had the conversion first data push in process. The results of that first data push weren't the quality we expected. We worked with Tyler and we pushed out the second push to September. We've instituted some metrics to track progress on hours and quality to mitigate and work to resolve to improve the second data push. And additionally, and very sadly, we had a major tragic event that just happened last week. We had the sudden death of our Tyler lead conversion data engineer, and he was a major leader and from our Tyler vendor that was working on conversion, and we will definitely and sorely miss him. Tyler is working on a recovery plan to address Jeff's tragic loss. And then as far as next steps on data conversion, we have later in the agenda, John Brown, our AOC data conversion lead, will take you through some work on data cleanup. We need to look across data conversion between ICMS and NC-aware replacement. Some data will be moving to the magistrate function of Odyssey. On a positive, we did start testing. You can see that the testing box being shaded in there. We've been focusing on some of the time standards part of configuration. Testing will continue over the next couple months, and as well as we'll be focused on looking at testing between NC-aware replacement and Odyssey. And then finally, to close out, the organizational change management box. Throughout the project and since day one, we've been very focused on user acceptance and usage of all these changes, with users being you and the citizens and general public, the branch, outside agencies. We didn't get a chance last advisory meeting to cover the presentation of all of our focus in this area. we do have a major effort and focus of ensuring that this major change and transformation will be accepted. And I think you'll be excited to go through the presentation. And I'll just wrap up with change is hard, and we're going to need your personal help and continued support to help with all these changes, as we will be doing things differently in the branch. And you know, I'm very optimistic and excited with our first deliverable that you'll be seeing. But it is a change, and you know, we'll need everyone's support to move through it. I'm optimistic that we're on a good track. A lot has been done over the last 3 months, and a lot more to come. Any questions?
Thank you, Bob. Are there any questions for Bob? I have one, I guess, two quick questions, Bob. One, and if you would prefer to wait until a later update, that's fine, but I understood you to say that we have no draft contract deliverables from Tyler at this point, and I'm just, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, and that's a statement of just one of the projects, the NC-aware replacement. The project plan timeline calls for the deliverables to be distributed in the month of August. So there's still some time, and we've gotten an update on the status of each of those deliverables. So I wouldn't call it an issue, just a concern.
Do we have any feedback from law enforcement yet as to how different these applications are to the ones they are currently accustomed to using?
As I covered in Brazos, we actually have the pilot agencies participating in the testing, so they're actually opening defects, and what we tried to do is get a spread of different sheriff's office, state highway patrol, alcohol and law enforcement. So have a mix of people try to test it. So yes, we've been getting feedback from law enforcement there. And then the other thing that we've that I mentioned was this whole product experience. We actually had a number of law enforcement officers participate in looking at the prototype for the NC-aware eWarrant product, and just great participation. You know, where Tyler would say, you know, what do you think we do next on a warrant, or you know, how would you use the product? What do you think is the next step? Do you find this easy? Do you find it hard? So really good participation, and I think that will help shape the eWarrant product rollout.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Bob? Okay, at this point, we'll hear from Anthony Whitmore on the foundational update.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present the foundational project status today. Today, I want to talk specifically about the ICMS infrastructure that we're going to be deploying into the court facilities, as well as I want to do a little bit of a network status update. So let me start by saying I apologize to the committee. It dawned upon me, and I learned from Bob's presentation, that I really owe it to the committee to put together a timeline. All of these foundational projects, or what we refer to foundational IT projects, are very similar in that the timeline, we actually started the initial foundational project, Office 365 deployment, where we have moved to a cloud-hosted email system, and some of you have already experienced where we're moving storage to the cloud, where we're moving your traditional file server storage to cloud-hosted storage, OneDrive, and so forth. But I owe it to the committee. I'll have a timeline slide as well of all of these foundational projects that we have implemented, such as 365, and now the ICMS infrastructure and court facilities, as well as the network project, so that you have an understanding of how each of these technologies have dependencies and a roadmap and a building block towards the overall ICMS project, which has a huge dependency on having email in place that's integrated with the case management system to allow court calendar scheduling, Webex integration, and all of these other things. Infrastructure upgrades in the courthouse. So some of you, particularly those of you who are in the pilot counties, are probably familiar with in 2019 or earlier this year, Mr. Fowler's team did a business analysis of what infrastructure, laptops, scanners, public kiosk, digital signature pads, those types of things. Where would those potential types of infrastructure that will go towards ICMS case management system, allowing folks to come in, potentially e-file, scan documents, sign, and those types of things. We did a business analysis earlier this year, and the takeaway from that was we've now ordered all of for the pilot sites equipment. It's scheduled to be delivered later this calendar year. My team will be working scheduling for the pilot facilities later this calendar and early next year, start rolling that equipment out. The laptops. We got a little bit of an earlier start on the laptop deployment given the COVID situation than we'd anticipated. Part of the business analysis that I mentioned earlier is where we determine what positions within clerk's office, DA, judges' offices, and so forth, public defender offices would be high candidates for mobility within the court facility. For instance, a clerk of court a clerk of court person who also works in the courtroom. What opportunity would there be to potentially replace the desktop at the clerk's office and the courtroom desktop to use one device to go back and forth and provide a huge cost savings to the AOC as well, but more importantly, provide a more efficient way for that particular user. Same thing with the district attorney's office, an ADA or a public defender moving throughout the courthouse. That type of business analysis is yielded where would be high candidates for things like laptop deployment. We took that information and as you can see, we've deployed, AOC has deployed, or will have deployed at the end of September about 1,800 devices to those positions who we had assessed that would be candidates for mobility for ICMS in the future, but also positions that are candidates now for telework capability. For instance, a hearing clerk who may be working from home conducting remote hearings, or members of the DA's office, the defender's office, and judge's office who have potential to work from home. Those are folks who we're targeting now for laptop deployment, and we think will be good candidates once they're back in the office and they're able to move throughout the courthouse. As you can see, we've also now been fortunate enough to acquire another 1,000 devices in addition to the 1,800, specifically targeting, for the most part, district attorney offices and magistrate offices where desktops continue to be today, and we have seen and heard back as part of an HR discussion not too long ago in regards to the K-12 issue and so forth, where folks are being confined more to teleworking and so forth, these 1,000 devices will be targeted for those groups to help further support telework needs and those folks long term for the ICMS effort. Any questions on this slide before we move towards to the network slide? Okay, Cindy, if you want to move to the network project. So as I mentioned in our last update, we had postponed the network, which was scheduled in March timeframe earlier this year. We rescheduled for 6 months given the COVID issue, which moved us to the August timeframe. Regrettably, the vendors who we've been dependent upon, our circuit vendors, our carriers, and so forth, because of their resource issues given COVID and so forth, we have reluctantly now had to postpone this effort until the November timeframe. However, on a positive note, I'm very confident that we are going to be able to make the November timeframe. The network project is now moved out of the configuration stage. We've completed testing. We've also completed lots of online training for some of the functionality that I'll show you in just a minute. That's going to be provided to judicial branch folk. So I am very confident that we will be able to kick off the initial pilot counties in November of this year with a continuous rollout through the September timeframe of 21. I think it's also important to note we will be initially rolling out to the pilot ICMS counties, and obviously we'll complete the network rollout well in advance of the ICMS rollout. So again, reminding folks that the network that we're rolling out is ICMS is highly dependent on this network. You may remember in our last discussion, we talked about the fact that AOC is moving from a mainframe environment to a cloud-hosted case management, e-citation, and e-warrant application, as well as e-filing. So this network will allow us to meet those future demands. Cindy, if you want to take me to the next slide. So wanted to provide, I don't want to get too geek on everyone here, but just wanted to give everyone a flavor of some of the feature functionality that this new network will provide. Again, reminding folks, the network project consists of replacing end-of-life equipment, the switches, the routers, everything, all of that hardware that's in the court facility is end-of-life. So that's one objective of the project. But secondarily, we're going to a new network architecture, hybrid cloud, software-defined networking to be able to have scalability and resiliency to meet whatever the future voice, video, and data requirements are. Some of the features that you will see or get as part of the network once we go to your county and convert you over to the new network are things like Webex Teams. If you're familiar with Microsoft Teams, Webex Teams is going to be very, very similar in that you will literally be able to create a virtual conference room, I guess would probably be the best example, where typically you would be meeting in a conference room and working on a whiteboard or sharing a file up on the screen to look at. This is the online version of that. Any user in AOC will be able to create their own Webex team, invite people to that team. This is going to be scalable to outside the AOC as well. So you would literally be able to schedule via Outlook a team meeting or provide an instant message to your team members that let's get together right now, throw something up on the whiteboard. Everyone has access to that whiteboard, literally to make changes to whatever diagram discussions or have you. So it's essentially an online version of a conference room meeting. Webex Meetings is what we're doing right now. Continue to have that same feature functionality in the future. I would note that Webex Meetings, we have seen I think my last metric was over 1,000% increase in usage. Having Webex Meetings capability in place to be able to hold all of these virtual meetings like we're holding today, and for the court system to be able to hold hearings, first appearances, and initial appearances and such, has been a huge help to the branch in being able to continue to do some of our court businesses over the past 2 or 3 months. So again, that's you will continue to see, and actually you will see a more advanced version of Webex Meetings. I know through some of the COVID task force meetings that I sat through, I heard a lot of discussion about Webex Meetings not having some of the feature functionality of, for instance, a Zoom, where you can have breakout sessions and a mediator or a judge could put parties on hold and such. We've been working, AFC has been working with Cisco to help them get us to and get Webex Meetings to a point where those feature functionalities, that's a business requirement of the court system. I'm optimistic we're going to be able to roll that out later this calendar year as well, hopefully in the September, definitely in the November timeframe. Network capacity and speed. I'm going to call this new network the Autobahn for the applications that Mr. Fowler's team is working to, these fast, sleek applications that Mr. Fowler's team is working to configure for us. We're going to create the network Autobahn, the super highway for those applications to run on. Every court facility is going to have 2 network connections for resiliency and failover capability, as well as scalability. One network connection, one network literally circuit is going to be connected to the AOC network, whereas there'll be a circuit directly out to the internet. If you're utilizing Tyler Technologies in their cloud-hosted environment, we're going to push that out via the internet path, 365, and some of your other WebEx type applications, whereas some of your voice applications and so forth are going to typically use the AOC network. So we're trying to make the network as secure as possible, as well as resilient and scalable based on the future eCourt needs. Single number reach. This is where in the future, if you so choose, the new network will be able to provide you with a single number call functionality. If someone calls your desk, that number can also call your cell phone and potentially call your mobile device, your laptop device in the future if you have Webex Teams operational. That does mean we're going to be looking at as part of the, I don't have a bullet up here for it, but part of the network rollout is going to be a survey of every court facility across the state, where we're going to be surveying wireless expansion outside the courtroom. Today, every courtroom has both AOC as well as guest wireless capability. We're going to be looking at expanding to all judicial clerk's office, DA, public defender, judges' offices, and so forth, expanding that wireless capability to take advantage of some of those laptops that I talked about, earlier, to take advantage of mobility, so that if you're moving from office on your way to court or what have you, you have a much more effective way of communicating with your folk, as well as taking calls from the outside. eFax, electronic faxing. I think we all probably agree this is long overdue technology, but this is where we'll be replacing analog fax machines. those fax machines will go away, and you will start receiving faxes via your Outlook client. Basically, your faxes will come into your email. To the point I mentioned earlier about scanners as part of the ICMS effort, we will also be looking at adding more scanners for any scans into your email, thus to send out to the fax, send out via fax as well. Single wire paging. So today there's paging capability in most court facilities. This is a new technology that we'll be able to provide where you know, you could use your, as opposed to just being able to page within maybe your office, district attorney's office, judge's or clerk's office, you potentially could page to the entire courthouse. For instance, if there's a need to evacuate or what have you, this capability will be there and be something that we can help as we go out to facilities across the state. We can work with you if this is something desired. There is also the capability if we wanted a judicial branch-wide mass notification type system. There's some opportunity there as well. I threw a lot of technology out there as part of the network rollout. Is there any questions?
Those are some really exciting capabilities, Anthony. I'm glad to see them coming in. Does anyone have any questions for him? Thank you very much.
Questions,
go ahead.
If there are no questions, my last point would be, I would value this committee's feedback on. You heard me go through these technologies here. You heard me talk about the network project. It's going to be a significant effort coming into a court facility. Just the physical shipping of the equipment, offices receiving the network equipment, scheduling these fax machine changes, and scheduling and potentially implementing all these technologies. I'd like this committee's feedback on thoughts if I were to schedule starting in October, monthly Webexes, of which you, elected officials, could then potentially invite your staff. I might invite multiple counties to allow my staff to give a little bit of a heads up on what's coming, what to expect, that type of thing, and maybe do one every month just to allow folks to, one, know what's coming instead of an email and that type of thing, versus a WebEx where we could do a little Q&A, maybe like what I've done here, a 10 or 15-minute overview, and then allow for some Q&A. I know I'm not going to get any feedback today, but I would really value the advisory committee's feedback on thoughts like that, or we don't have time. Thank you, ma'am.
And Anthony, speaking from the clerk's perspective, I think that would be an outstanding idea. I think clerks would support you 100% in doing that.
Yes, sir.
And I think as well, Anthony, the importance, and you and I've talked a little bit about it offline, but you know, our county, for many of us, our county facilities managers are anxious to start having an understanding of, you know, the rollout and how it impacts other things, facility issues. And so I think it would be a good thing, one, to try and come up with some kind of a handout or timeline or whatever that we can start sharing with our county folks. But then two, those calls I think would be very useful. So thank you for offering.
Yes, ma'am. Stay tuned. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions, and thank you, Judge Badur. We also, of course, can use the chat frame as well if people have feedback or want to ask questions. New business, organizational change management. Cindy, do you want to talk to us about that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm actually very excited to talk to you about organizational change management. And the suggestion and the request that Anthony just made ties perfectly into the change management effort, informing, engaging, and preparing everyone for what's to come. So alongside the eCourts project work and infrastructure work that Bob and Anthony spoke to, the organizational change management team has been hard at work. You'll recall that OCM, or organizational change management, is focused on the people side of change, preparing those that will be affected by the eCourts project for the transition from the current state to the future state. So the OCM team is responsible for ensuring those affected by the change of implementing Guide and File, Brazos, the NC-aware replacement solution, and Odyssey are aware of the coming changes, know how it will affect them and their work, and have the ability to do their work in the future through training and support. To do this, we have to define what the future will look like for them. Governance plays a huge role in this. We have to create awareness. We do this through communication and other activities. And we have to ensure stakeholders have the knowledge and the ability to transfer or transition confidently from how they do their work today with the current tools to how those tasks will be accomplished in the future using the new tools. I mentioned governance plays a significant role in defining the future. In addition to this body, the advisory committee, the data management committees have been engaged to resolve data conversion issues, define e-filing code standards, and to approve business practice changes such as how dual judgments will be handled after implementation of Odyssey. We use the Uniform Court Procedures, or UCP process, to present the issues, and then a summary of the decisions are posted on Juno. As we receive questions regarding Odyssey, those questions and answers are also posted on Juno. We have over 100 ICMS FAQs on Juno today. Most of those questions have been submitted by the clerk community and are relative to case manager. But just recently, we've assembled a list of FAQs regarding attorney manager that will be of interest to DAs and PDs across the state. Those are expected to be added to Juno in the next week or so. Conducting business in an electronic environment will be very different than today, the paper world. So we'll naturally need new rules and guidance on how to accomplish the work in the new state accurately, securely, and consistently. So we're developing the eCourts rules of record keeping. These new eCourts record keeping rules will incorporate the UCP governance decisions, requirements based on Odyssey functionality, and will be developed throughout the pilot implementation and in consultation with the existing rules of record keeping committee. We are particularly excited about the implementation guide that's being developed, and I'll share more details on that in just a moment. Training for court staff and stakeholders is obviously critical for success. We're working closely with the Tyler team to ensure training will be North Carolina specific, thorough, and provided well in advance of implementation, but not so far out that users forget what they've learned by the time they start using the actual tools. And then project communication is also critical, and I'll speak to that a little bit more, that effort, in just a moment. So the implementation guides are being developed for Brazos, the NC-aware replacement solution, and Odyssey ICMS implementation. The guides will provide a weekly countdown to implementation, identifying the weekly tasks to be accomplished to support a smooth transition. It breaks down into bite-sized pieces, if you will, all of the information that needs to be shared between the project team and the counties, activities that need to take place, and tasks that must be accomplished prior to go live. Implementation will require a joint effort between the counties, the court staff, and AOC and Tyler. It has to be a true partnership to be successful. So for implementation of Odyssey, the implementation guide starts at week 35 and counts down through week 1 to go live. Each county will be assigned an AOC site coordinator to work with a site coordination team in the county. And that coordination team will be made up of representatives from each of the user groups or offices. So there'll be representation from the clerk's office, the DAs and PDs, the judges and their staff and magistrates as well. The AOC site coordinator and team will work with the county coordination team to gather and share information back and forth and ensure identified tasks are completed and that the timing of these tasks and project activities are aligned. The structure, most importantly, provides a clear and consistent channel for communication between the project team and the county leaders and their staff. Examples of some of the big bucket tasks necessary for implementation and in the ICMS implementation guide include ensuring local system configuration decisions are made and communicated, all staff register for training and complete prerequisite training, data cleanup work is completed, and pending case backlogs are reduced to the extent possible. And something counties may not be thinking about at this point is local policies and practices will be impacted by Odyssey. So they'll need to begin thinking about what changes need to be made as a result of Odyssey and e-filing requirements and update those policies and local practices, as well as communicate those to the local bar and other business partners. As with every pilot, we expect the implementation guide to change and be improved throughout the pilot implementation process. The goal is to create a final product that will be complete and repeatable to support implementation for every subsequent county to ensure a smooth transition. So some of the major tasks identified in the ICMS implementation guide to be completed are listed here with their corresponding weeks. For example, week 35, the county site coordination team will begin to form and weekly meeting dates will be identified. At week 26, we'll want to hold a county kickoff to ensure all of the staff is informed, that they know what to expect, and hopefully we can help them become excited about what the future is going to look like. At week 23, we'll need to begin preparing staff for ICMS training. And in some cases, this may require remedial computer skills training for some. And we want to make sure that that's available and there's time for that to take place. Week 23, we'll need to begin preparing staff, in weeks immediately before transitioning to Odyssey and immediately after. Counties will want to consider ramping down and then ramping back up their court dockets. The time to make those decisions will need to happen around week 17. Self-guided training using the online Tyler University modules will need to be done around week 15, week 15. And then week 4 to go live will include the instructor-led training for all court staff, preparing pending cases for transition, which will include some scanning efforts, and preparing local partners for expected changes as well. So regarding training, end-user training will include Tyler University and instructor-led training for all court staff. Tyler University is an online training tool consisting of multiple modules. All court staff will need to complete the self-guided training as a prerequisite for the instructor-led training, as it provides the foundation for understanding Odyssey. The instructor-led courses will be led by Tyler trainers for the pilot counties and early adopter county. AOC trainers will provide North Carolina-specific business scenarios and work with the court staff through the lab exercises. The training will take place over the 4, possibly 5 weeks immediately preceding go live. It'll take several weeks to train all of the court staff. But again, we don't want to conduct the training so far in advance that staff lose what they've learned before they actually begin to use the system. And we hope to conduct the training in person at the NCJC, but of course, we are developing a contingency plan for virtual training if that's necessary. And then training for ICMS will include training for case manager, which is primarily focused on clerks, judges and their staff, and magistrates. Attorney manager, which is the tool for DAs and PDs. Clerk edition for clerks in high volume, fast-paced courtrooms such as traffic court, and e-filing or file and serve, which is the e-filing component of the Odyssey system. The communication strategies to support and facilitate change management include one-way and two-way communications, as well as a change agent network that we are continuing to define and develop. You're largely familiar with the one-way communication tools already employed, which includes articles and columns and in the news. We will also start pushing out did you know emails with brief snippets of information about changes and interesting facts associated with Odyssey and the implementation process, the NC Aware replacement solution, and Brazos as well. The objective is to keep court staff interested and updated on what's to come. We'll be sending out a newsletter to the pilot counties, and this will provide a little more detail than what's included in the Did You Know articles. And we'll continue to create newsletters and send them out to the other counties as we move closer to their implementation tracks. And of course, we'll continue to keep the FAQs and governance decisions updated on Juno. The two-way communications include in-person and virtual meetings with user groups and external stakeholders, such as the meetings that Anthony is requesting. We'll also hold quarterly meetings with the pilot county court leaders to ensure everyone is informed and confident with the implementation process and knows what to expect. The objective, of course, is to communicate thoroughly and build confidence in the process. We're also developing a change agent network, which you are naturally already a part of. People receive information differently from different sources. Your peers expect and trust the information you share regarding eCourts and what's to come. Frontline staff will want to know specifics on how to do their jobs and how they will be personally impacted. And they'll want to hear that and trust the information being shared from their managers and supervisors. So we want to utilize these existing communication channels to, again, communicate important information, continue to build confidence, and prepare courts and citizens for the eCourts future. And that's really everything that I have to share at this point. Are there any questions I can answer for you?
Cynthia, I think there were some in the chat box. A question just, or a recommendation probably, that we implement online training as well for members of the defense bar through IDS who may be court appointed and otherwise, will have to interface with some of this technology.
Absolutely. We will. We are continuing to develop our stakeholder analysis to identify all of the groups that need to receive information and training. So I'll be sure that that the Defense Bar IDS, that they are included as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, the sooner that y'all are in position to start pushing some of this out, I think will reduce a lot of people's anxieties. It looks like an excellent rollout plan. So thank you for sharing it today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Next, we'll be moving to the data cleanup. And John Brown.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's John Brown. I'm the Senior Project Manager responsible for conversion. I may pause from time to time to clear my throat. The weather's affected my voice a little bit, so I'll apologize in advance. If you want to take us to the next slide, Cindy, please. Thank you. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, well, I'm going to provide an overview of the data cleanup as a concept and an update. And then I'm going to follow up with a discussion around the approach for executing the data cleanup. And just to sort of set some expectations about what to expect in the presentation, I'm going to share the problem, the solution, the team involved with working the solution and the timing, and then we'll talk about specifics in the approach section. Okay. So as a part of the process of converting the current AOC application data, which there are many, over to the Tyler application, of which there are, well, in this case, Odyssey would be one of them. There are opportunities to address data issues and challenges related to those legacy applications. And I think a number of folks have been involved in the DMC meetings, the Data Management Committee meetings, and so that would be, you'll have some reference for what we're sharing here as it relates to that. Give me the next slide, please. So as promised, we'll start with the problem. There's basically three elements to it. So the first part of it really is that there are situations where there's invalid or inconsistent data in the current applications. Typically, that's due to historical inability of an application to ensure valid data entry. There are a variety of reasons, changes in technology. To keep people from double entering or entering the wrong thing in a particular field, or too many characters in a year field, something like that. We can't move invalid data into the Odyssey system, and most of the data issues are not to minimize them, but they're minor in nature. And what I mean by that is we've been able to come up with acceptable solutions on how to deal with them. Thanks, Cindy. Yep, solutions. That's great. Sorry, next slide. Thank you. So the solutions in net are either manual or automatic. So a manual resolution to a data issue, we would use that approach when there's low volume for the issue, and then where the county doesn't agree with a potential business rule for some particular reason that we would use as part of the automatic cleanup. Those manual solutions or remediation of the data issues would be completed by county-based resources, and those county-based resources would leverage reports and that identify the issues, and then instructions provided by the AOC to complete the manual cleanup. In lieu of the manual cleanup, we have an automatic option. So we would leverage the automatic option in a couple of situations. In some instances, there's high volumes of the data issue. It might be a minor issue, but there's a lot of it because we have like 1,094 data elements in our systems. So there's opportunity to have a lot of a issue show up. So we would remediate those using a business rule that would uniformly apply the fix to those particular situations. And those are business rules that have been adopted by the applicable governance committees, and they represent the best approach for each individual situation. Next slide, please. So who would we sort of see as part of that all of those solutions? So the AOC Business Systems Analyst and Systems Analyst are the folks that would work with the county-based resources to provide the information they need, the reports, instruction, and those kind of things. And then the county-based leadership team, obviously, to to help with identifying the appropriate resources to do the cleanup within their individual counties. And then, of course, the county-based resources themselves as assigned by the pilot county leadership team. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so here we talk a little bit about timing. So the manual cleanup by the county-based resources is targeted to start in early October, and it would correspond to some degree with the dissemination of the implementation guide that Cindy mentioned. We can talk a little bit more about that in the approach. So we would give the cleanup reports, and those are the reports that identify the areas of opportunity for data cleanup and the associated instructions to those counties at that time. And the manual cleanup would continue for, there's a pretty big window where manual cleanup can be leveraged, right? And it would be from the targeted early October timeframe up to the go live event for a particular county. The automatic application of business rules, which would systemically address any remaining data cleanup opportunities, those are applied as part of the go live event. So there's a final conversion of the data, if you will, where we take the data out of the old systems and put it in the new systems. So at that time, we would apply the business rules. And what that would do is anybody who elected to use the automatic cleanup and anybody, you know, where maybe there's some potential large volume situations and folks elected to not do those manually, all those things would be taken care of at that time. So that's the general overview. If you click on the next slide for me, Cindy, we'll talk about kind of how we would roll that approach out. We touched on that a little bit, but this is just to bring it together. So we would introduce this process to the counties. We would do that during the pilot county leadership meeting. We have a data cleanup process one-pager. It's basically the overview slides just to give people flavor for, you know, the what, the how, the who, and the when. And we would also introduce timelines and next steps at that point. From there, we would look to the county leaders to make the resource assignments. A lot of thought would probably go into that because of the type of data that needs to get cleaned up. The county leaders are obviously the right people to elect those resources because they understand, you know, who's going to have the skill sets they need to help with that. And then we would provide the reports. So that's the information about what data needs cleaned up and the instructions. So the instructions would be one-pagers that explain where the problem sort of lies based off of what's in the report, and then how to go into the applications to address those things. Next slide, please. And we will follow the process with question and answer sessions. So a couple of weeks after the reports and instructions are in the hands of the people doing the work, we would have Webex sessions, and those would be led by AOC, Business Systems Analyst or Systems Analyst, and they would answer questions that the county-based resources had at that time. The thinking is that, you know, a couple of weeks is time to sort of digest what's been presented to them. The instructions are very straightforward, but they may have you know, ancillary questions. So we're providing a format for those to take place at that time and get those questions addressed. And then again, the manual data cleanup would take place up until go live. So at which point in time we would institute the automatic cleanup. Any questions?
This Chair and Orr, I have one brief clarification question. This rollout of this report, is this going to go only to the pilot counties, or are these reports going to be going out in October?
That's a good question. So initially, it's our intention to give this information to the pilot counties.
So I think that for those of us who have been involved in data projects, technology projects, obviously the quality of the data in the system is very important, that it be as clean and accurate as possible if this is going to be successful. And this is a huge lift, unfortunately, or at least we are assuming at this point it's a huge lift to get these things cleaned up. And I think, at least from my perspective, and happy to hear from anyone else on the committee, but the sooner we can push out those lists and then also make sure, and I know the director is planning this, but that offices get additional support, much like when they rolled out NC Aware temporary workers to try and make sure all the data cleanup work is able to get done in a timely fashion while they are still running court and normal operations ongoing. John, thank you very much. We'll turn it, unless there are more comments or questions, we'll turn it now to the guide and file preview. And Brad, I think you're going to kick us off with that.
I am. Good afternoon. I'm excited to really talk just for a couple minutes about guide and file, the preview, because we're then going to show you one of the interviews live with Joe and Carolyn. So the number of exciting things about this, as Bob mentioned, this is the first eCourts product to launch. So the RFP process may have started over 2 years ago, and we're over a year into our contract, and we are working, and we talked to you all a lot about configuration and the data that's going to be in case manager and the data that's going to be in attorney manager. But as far as the first product that people will see, it in fact will be guide and file, and it's coming next Monday. So we've talked all along about how this is not so much a technology project as it is an access to justice project fueled by technology. So it's particularly fitting that guide and file is the first one to launch because it's so clearly an access to justice. It responds to recent events. We could have, and we considered rolling this out as Wake, Carnett, Johnston, and Lego Live, but instead we made the decision, which I think was a good one, that we would begin to provide access as quickly as we could. So that's why it's launching now, because people will be able to complete filings without having to go to a courthouse for certain filing types. Even though forms are available online, this is an additional opportunity. And it's a partnership with judicial branch officials and others to help encourage utilization. So getting the word out, there will be a communications plan that's also important for people on this call and others to help get the word out. It's a collaborative effort. AOC had folks on it. A key partner was the Equal Access to Justice Commission. They helped us identify and contract with subject matter experts who are licensed attorneys in this field. As you all know, attorneys can't be necessarily experts in everything. So they helped us identify. So you're going to see the domestic violence interview. Well, the attorney who helped design that interview is a head of a domestic violence program for a statewide nonprofit. So you can see the list of just part of the credentials that they have: a state bar counselor, professors at UNC School of Government. So just a number of experts that help make this. What it is, it's a self-help resource. Attorneys and non-attorneys can use it. This is not only for non-attorneys, attorneys or non-attorneys. It's an interactive online tool. It does not cost the user to use the tool. Now, that's the model we've adopted. Now, they have to pay appropriate filing fees. If they're filing something when they go to file it, they have to pay fees, but there's no fee for the use of the tool, and it's convenient. It's available online 24/7. There'll be step-by-step interviews developed by the attorneys we talked about. When we launch, it'll initially launch as guide and print. So they'll need to print the completed forms once they're ready for filing. As counties go live, so next year when Wake, Carnett, Johnston, and Lee go live, they'll also gain the opportunity in those counties to pay filing fees if appropriate and electronically file. So it's a precursor to e-filing, but it lines up with the project. And as Bob pointed out, it has next step information for litigants. It's legal information, not legal advice, but it tells them what the next step in the case is, and that is helpful. And it's a precursor. Immediate benefit, hopefully less time answering questions because there'll be more consistent information available online. And it'll also hopefully reduce the foot traffic. Some people, go in, get a form, go home, work on it, bring it back and forth, and this way they can do all of that online. and the printed forms are complete. They're legible, which will be helpful to judicial officials, and ready to file. As Bob mentioned, we started hoping to have at least 4 or 5. This is where we ended up, at least for launch. We will continue to improve, and we will continue to add interviews to this, but we wanted to have a substantial number for launch, and Tyler says many places launch with less than this, but we wanted to have a substantial launch. So today you'll see the domestic violence protection order, but all of those, just on the previous slide, will be available next Monday online. And so I'm going to turn it over to Joe and Carolyn so that they can demo you, will show you not every single piece of, but the major pieces of the domestic violence thing that litigant would see as they log in, if they were to log in, or go without an account and try to complete an interview. Thanks.
All right, very good. Thank you, Brad. This would be the page where the user would land on. It's 3 easy steps, right? Guide and file. Answer the online questions, create the legal forms for free. Again, no cost to the filer for creation of the forms. Print them and carry them to the clerk's office. You will notice in the fine print, filing fees may apply for certain case types. So, Carolyn, let's go ahead and kind of get into the application. Carolyn has gone ahead and created an account. We do recommend that because that way you can go back to your filing if something interrupts you and you need to quit, stop and come back, pick back up where you were. You can see she has a number of filings already that she's been working on. We're going to pull up our domestic violence protective order filing. Notice she's just going to click resume and she can pull that right back up. It's going to load all the information that she's already entered into the system. We did that for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously, to demo that for you, but also for time, because we realize we're up against the clock here and we're trying to move this thing along. So we did pre-enter what we needed. When this thing goes in production, actually the previous page they would land on would be a list of those type of filings, and then they would need to select which filing that they wanted to pursue. You'll see here we have our domestic violence protective order, and it just explains a little bit about the situation. You know, have you had this happen to you? If so, this may be an interview that might help you. But we're real concerned about safety, obviously, with this type of filing. You'll see in big red letters there, if you are in danger, call 911. Go ahead, Carolyn, let's click and kind of proceed through this thing. We thought it was important to have that there on that first page in the event the person is in a dangerous situation, because obviously their personal safety is what's foremost to get this filing done.
I apologize. It looks like it's taking a while to upload for some reason. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what's around the...
Okay. All right. We'll keep working on that, Carolyn. This is a test site, so it does run a little slower, but it shouldn't run that slow on us. As you're looking around the screen, and you'll see this through all of the interviews, there's certain things: select an interview, complete an interview, review, and eventually when we get to the point where we can file it electronically, just submit documents at the end will be very helpful too. But again, just looking around, and you can see up here at the top, we got a home, start an interview, buy interviews is where Carolyn went to pull up that one that she had already done earlier. Looking to the far right of the screen, you'll see her name. That's her account that she set up and is displayed there. Again, we do recommend they do that because particularly with this type of filing, something could happen where they would need to quit working on the filing and leave and go somewhere else. Down the right-hand side of the screen, and you will notice that on each screen in the system, there are some helpful links as far as finding an attorney, these kinds of things, nonprofit things. We have links throughout the application that can point them toward domestic violence protective agencies and these kinds of things. Down at the bottom, in the blue banner at the bottom, you'll notice a couple of items: guide and file, FAQs, technical support, and these things. These are not really specific to North Carolina, but more toward the application itself if they're having issues or things that may come up during the course of the filing. Okay. Did it time out on us, Carolyn? You think that's what our issue was?
I'm thinking there's something amiss.
Yep. Let's see if we can pull it back up here. As she's working on that, again, these are interviews. In other words, they're asking questions. Okay, what is your name, your relationship toward the defendant, and these kinds of things. And the language has been simplified, if you will, by the legal SMEs that worked on this to try to make it more common language for the average citizen. What? Yeah, yeah, it might be time for an upgrade. Where the average citizen could understand the language, right? And we tried to go through and explain things like, okay, what is an ex parte hearing? What is that? What can come out of that, and these kinds of things. And so it's a little different than just sitting down and filling out those forms. You know, today, if you go into a clerk's office, typically they're going to ask you a couple of questions, right? And one of those is going to be, what's your relationship to the defendant? Based on the answer to that question is going to determine what paperwork they give you, generally speaking. Most offices I've been to, they have the 50B filing, which is what this is. And then they had the 50C, depending on what the answer to your question was. And we modeled it after that, but again, tried to keep it simple and a little more what I would call common sense, grouping questions together that belong together that would ultimately fill out the forms that are needed for this particular type of filing. Good example of that is when we're looking at defendant information and we're asking about, okay, does the defendant have any weapons? Has he fought with law enforcement in the past? And these kinds of things. It's very helpful. Yeah, let's go ahead and skip ahead a notch there. Yes, it does use the current forms that we have, so it's it'll look just like the forms that we have. It just fills the data into the fields, so certainly it does. This is one of the first pages there. You notice they got 4 options: a domestic violence protective order, and then you have some subsequent processes as far as renew, amend, or if there's a violation. When this thing first goes live, those last 3 will not be interviews. They will instead direct the person to, okay, you want to file a subsequent process. At this time, you'll need to go to the clerk's office to file that. That won't be available in the first run of this, but that will be, as we say, coming soon. You can see our page here, who is the plaintiff. Tried to provide some information here. If you've read any of these over the course of years, a lot of times people get confused about who the plaintiff should be. So we've tried to offer some guidance there. We're going to keep ours pretty simple and just go with myself. And you can see, depending on the choices that you make, will be the guidance that is at the bottom. Again, giving information, but not legal advice. You'll see it talks throughout the application about, relationships and certain relationships. Okay, so so what is your relationship with the defendant? We've chose spouse. So based on our previous selection and this selection, the system says, okay, you're going to be the victim and the plaintiff in this particular filing. So we're going to proceed with that as the plaintiff. It's like I said, people get confused on that. Okay, so what about the qualifying acts? What has happened? Tell us a little bit about what's happened, okay? And so as we work through this, you'll see things. There's a note there for the same-sex dating relationship. That doesn't qualify currently, but if you've been living together in the same household, that may help you with that situation. Again, just guiding along and giving information as we go along. You may notice under that bar at the top that says complete interview, you'll start seeing a little blue line, and that's just kind of measuring how far we're going along. Typically, it takes about an hour or so to do one of these, depending on how complicated your filing is. You'll notice here we've got our plaintiff information entered there. There's language there that says, hey, this, you can keep it confidential if you want to. We've got a couple of links to the Attorney General's office for that confidentiality program, and then the other link, and I'm going to take a second and talk about that, links to a page that is the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence, where they can seek and get additional information about local domestic violence advocacy agencies that may help them through this process. Because as we all know, this court order is not going to solve the problem. It takes a multidisciplinary approach to do this. Okay, so now we got information about our defendant. We've got our defendant information in there. This type of filing only has one defendant. So we can customize the application to, okay, once we've got the defendant's name, we can be specific. is Henry B. Jones's address the same as yours? Okay. If it is, the system knows you've already put that in there. Clicking yes would put his in there. If it's not, then no, and we can enter our data and proceed on to the next page. Again, trying to build on information as we go, so you don't have to enter the same information multiple times is the goal here. That address, it may pop up several times. You'll see here a lot of information about the defendant. This goes into the identifying information form, helps our law enforcement partners to be able to serve this thing once it's issued. You'll see we've under gender there, we got male, female, not listed, and then an opportunity to put in the text box if you need. Did something similar with race and these kinds of things to get the information into the system. Okay, very good, Carolyn. We'll go ahead and proceed to the next one. Again, getting as much information as we can about the defendant, because that's helpful for law enforcement as the case proceeds, and we try to get it served and get them entered in BCI and NCIC and these kinds of things, if that's appropriate. The more information law enforcement has, when they get it in their hand, the better off they are. We have defendant's employer information. We'll put that detail in. Notice a lot of our questions, you'll see red asterisks up beside it. If so, we got to have some kind of response, okay? And we realize not everybody knows everything about everybody, so do not know maybe the proper answer to that question during the course of the interview, okay? So proceeding along, and what this thing is doing is just compiling that data and getting ready to populate those forms. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Service Member Civil Relief Act affidavit. We've got some information here concerning that. They pick the appropriate responses, based on appropriate responses, and you see this throughout the application. It may produce other text fields for further information as needed. We'll go ahead and click next on that, Carolyn, to carry us forward. And again, it's compiling that information, filling out these forms, determining which forms we need, because based on the responses, we may not need certain forms. Vehicle information. Okay, so we've got the information already in here. Does he have a driver's license? We don't know, may not know. I mean, I have a very good relationship with my wife. I do not know her driver's license number. So not everybody knows everything about everybody. We understand that. So, but we've got a couple of vehicles information in here. Again, that more detail that helps as far as the filing, information for the court, information for law enforcement ultimately when it gets in their hands. This is a good example of what I was talking about, defendant weapon information. You'll see a series of questions here. The first 4 questions or so actually go on that identifying information. The last couple of questions actually go on the complaint, but they're similar questions, similar subject matter. So it makes sense to kind of put it all together where we can collect all of that while they're thinking along those particular lines. Okay. All right. And again, the further we get into this thing, the deeper we get, the more information it has to compile to populate the forms and validate, oh, okay, based on that decision you made, I need to go in this direction. It can branch off depending on what the response to the questions are. And it is possible they put a response in there that says, hey, this may not be the interview for you because of that last answer that you had. Was that really what you meant, or do you want to back up and try that again? Okay, pending court information, again, this is coming right off the complaint, collecting that information so it can populate the form. The next question we're going to get to is that one where, they tell their story, right? And a lot of times that story can be rather lengthy, as we all know. So these fields, these data fields at the bottom here, the text fields, are designed to where they just keep on typing, keep on keying in, and if it's too much to go on that particular area of the form, it will create an overflow and say, okay, see addendum 4 or whatever, and so we'll have all that information. If children were involved, again, that would branch off as carry us in a different direction. In our scenario, we're just going to leave it at no and proceed on through. Again, based on your question, it's an interview. It's kind of like TurboTax, right? Depending on what you put in, it's going to be the direction that it carries you into. But it's incumbent upon the filer to put the information in, obviously, to be accurate with the information and put the detail. Here's what I was talking about earlier as far as, okay, that ex parte order. What is that? What can it do for you? Would you like to try to get one of those? Yes, I would. Okay, so here's what it is. We're going to click OK and hit next. You probably noticed too throughout the application, you see some big blue eyes, I call them. It's a round dot with an eye in the middle. That can provide additional information. That's how Carolyn just imaged that particular item as far as additional information was concerned. So it says, oh, okay, now I know I need an ex parte order draft. So it's going to bring that in. You'll see when we get to that part of that will be filled out. Okay, so what would you like for the court to do? Check as many boxes as you need. You've got squares, you got multiple choices. Depending on what box you check will dictate if additional information is needed. I do want to point out there where it says which residence are you referring to? Again, it remembers you put this in. Is this one of them? If it isn't, you can add one. Okay. Again, don't have to enter the same information a number of times to populate multiple forms. I think that's a big plus. In the system, it can help drive it along, help get the filing done a little quicker, and move it along to where that person can go ahead and go down to the clerk's office and begin to seek some relief for the current situation. So again, it's compiling all that information, and we're just continuing. Okay, what kind of relief do you want? What do you know, is it where you work? If you had kids, notice that it popped the school up there. Any other information that you need to know the court. Moving along here again, Carolyn pointing out specific to the defendant. Tell us about Henry D. Jones. Okay, what else do you need from the court? I want to have any contact with me. Oh, I need possession of the vehicle. It knows you've already entered that vehicle information. Which one are you talking about? Is it one of these or is it an additional one? Again, remembers that information that you put in. If he's driving us through the system, pulling that information back. Okay, next steps. So we're pretty much at the end of the interview. Due to time, we're going to kind of skip on to the end here and look at the final product of what we've assembled. Again, there's no cost for this filing, so we don't have to get into the cost of that. Just proceed, to the next page and all, and we'll look at the forms. And if we need to go back and make changes, the filer can do that after they look at the forms. So again, it's compiling all this data, and this is going to take a second or two. Again, this is a test site, so our test sites typically run a little slower. We'll give Anthony a little grace on that and go through there. As Carolyn says, this is the ta-da moment right here. Okay? So here's what we've got based on all the work we've done. We've got name, got your plaintiff and your defendant, and scrolling on down, information. Let's go ahead and interject a complaint, if you would, Carolyn, take a look at it. They do have to look at each one of them to print them, or they can download them and print them. And the applications have to look. You need to look at what you've done here. Again, as has been pointed out, good thing here, you can read this form, right? You don't have to deal with the handwriting issues that we have to deal with sometimes with filings. There's nothing written down the side. Just very, very precise and just a well-written form. And then we do tell them it has to be in English and these kinds of things. As at the beginning, I think we skipped over that due to time, but you can see how the form is filled out. Okay. All right, very good, Carolyn. Let's close that one. Kind of move along to the next one. You see, we got our identifying information. That's going to have all the detail about the defendant that we entered in and those kinds of things. I said, Carolyn, it's going to image. It should pull up here shortly. Unless we had a.
You see it?
There we go. All right, there we go. You have me scared there for a moment. Okay, but you can see all the detail there. Very helpful to the sheriff's office when they get to serving these things and for law enforcement and of that nature. Okay, we can go ahead and close that one, Carolyn. And we've got a service members form in here. Fills that out. Of course, this is an affidavit that has to be signed in front of the clerk and that kind of thing. We do give instruction at the end on what forms can be signed and that. Okay, next one. This is the ex parte, I believe, right? Yes. And you're like, okay, why you got an ex parte, Joe? Well, it's just the top part filled out for the judge. That's what we saw in a lot of clerks' offices is when that packet is given to the plaintiff, they're instructed to fill out what I call that top part up there. but the judge didn't have to fill that in, and that's what you see here. You see the defendant's name throughout the draft. And again, this is guide and print. So they print it off, and it's obviously a piece of paper when it gets to the judge so that they can check the boxes they need, these kinds of things. Same thing for the notice of hearing. Kind of helps the clerk a little bit by having the top part filled out. Again, that was consistent with what we saw with packages getting at the clerk's office. Summons, same thing. Already keyed in at the top. Clerk obviously would have to finish it out with signatures and these kinds of things. So, all righty. So next steps. This is something that's kind of new. A lot of detail coming from AOC. Again, legal information, not legal advice. It gets into our legal disclaimer again. Where did I begin? Review the forms carefully. It tells you to do that. If you need to go back and change something, you can. Which we think is important. It's okay to have some blanks because the judge is going to fill in some stuff. Here's a list of forms. You need to double check and make sure these are the forms you got. Okay. Extra sheets. If you had any extra sheets, you want to make sure you attach them, bring those with you. Again, safety. Make sure you have a safety, make a safety plan. If you need help with that, here's a link to some agencies that can help you with that. So how do I finalize these things? It talks about the ones that need a signature and the ones that you need to wait until you get to the clerk's office to have signed. Okay. Service members, obviously that's an affidavit. If there was a child, notice there was no child affidavit in ours. We didn't need that form because that was not in our scenario, so it didn't produce it. It does make a reference here. There are some counties where it can be filed electronically through our current e-filing system. And what would happen is they would carry those printed documents to that advocacy agency. The advocacy agency would have to rekey that stuff in the other system, but at least the advocate already has the information. All they have to do is key it in. And then, of course, for most of our courthouses, go to the courthouse, okay? And take your paperwork with you. When you get there at the clerk's office, they're going to probably give you some detail about deadlines, what time these particular hearings held each day. You may be too late. You may have to come back another day, depending on what local policies are and these kinds of things. It does emphasize there is no cost for this. As you'll see, there's no cost for this type of filing, which is a lot of people don't know that. They don't realize that. So how about the other party? How do we get them served? There's some information in here about that. Do I need to go to court? Yes, you got to go to court, okay? And it kind of gets into a little bit of detail about that as far as make sure you answer the judge's questions completely, obviously, honestly, and these kinds of things. Then it talks about coming back for a permanent order hearing, usually within 10 days. And again, make sure you're in court. Prepare for court. What I need to do? Well, be prepared to tell what happened, okay? About the most recent incident, these kinds of things. If you got witnesses, bring those with you. Consider a safety plan for court because most likely the defendant's going to be there if he's been served, okay? So what else would I need to bring to court? Any type of evidence that you got, okay? We got some guidance in here about going to court, tips for going to court. Be there early. Dress appropriately, okay? It felt like that was a good thing to mention. Talks a little bit about court etiquette there, telling the truth and conducting yourself properly. Scroll on down, Carolyn, because the clock's ticking here. All right. So what happens after the judge makes a decision? Well, it depends on the decision that's made, right? And it goes through those different scenarios about if the judge grants an order, if the judge denies an order, what can and may happen. What else do you need to know? This would have been emphasized throughout the application. We had time to talk about it. Is if you do not understand, you should consult an attorney. And there's a references there to how to get in touch with an attorney if you can't afford one and these kinds of things. We're real interested in this particular document that's being produced because it, again, trying to get that equal access to justice. Some counties, through local funding or whatever, they have a lot of details, some not so much. So again, I felt it was important to have this information here, again, that legal information for the plaintiff to help them with the whole scenario. And that pretty much concludes our demo. Sorry for talking so fast, but we had a long ways to go and an extremely short time to get there. So,
Joe, I'm very impressed at how quickly you're able to run through that. There are a couple of just quick questions in the chat box. And one of them has to do with if the person does this online but does not print it out, are they able to, is the ability to pull it up at the clerk's office and print that out once they get to the clerk's office? Does it have the capacity to save and then go back and resume completing it?
Yes, if they created that account, Lauren, they can do that. And that's the beauty of this thing. It is a web application. So they do have the ability to do that. And so anywhere they can get access to the web and the printer, then yes, they can print that.
Okay. Are there other questions regarding this or comments regarding this? So I think this is, I mean, honestly, I've been nervous about how this would roll out and not cross the line of providing legal advice. While you ran through it very quickly, this really looks like an amazing tool, and I think really does a lot to expand access to the courts. So it's clear it took a lot of work to come up with all of those questions, and then also just the description of what to expect and all of that. It was a tremendous amount of work and review and copy editing, I'm sure. So we appreciate very much the teams who've been involved in that.
Yeah, it was very much a team approach. And Carolyn her task was to put all that together. Okay, Carolyn, after it does this, I need to go over here and come back over here and do that and do this right here. If you do this, then it needs to go here. If we got that done, let us know. So she did an excellent job.
Well, thank you. If there are no comments or questions regarding the guidance file, looks like that's going to roll out next week. So that's an exciting new development and in our process here of moving electronic courts or eCourts, ICMS along. We do have the next meeting set for November 19th, 2020. And I imagine we'll be meeting by Webex again. We will hope that for our 2021 meetings, we won't have to do that, but we have some proposed 2021 dates for people who want to go ahead and mark their calendars. Cindy, I don't know if we can put those up on the screen, but they're February 18th, 2021, May 20th, August 19th, and November 18th. Y'all were sent earlier today, I think, the final slide deck that was used today, and there is a slide in that lists those dates. But again, February 18th, May 20th, August 19th, and November 18th will be our 2021 proposed dates. We will see you again on November 19th. I appreciate those of you who responded to my inquiry about the print and queue. At this point, AOC is moving forward with the clerk review queue. We can at a later date revisit this issue if that becomes something that there's continued discussion about, and it can be added on as we discussed in the email. But at this point, based on the feedback of the committee, I don't think we intend to add it to the agenda, probably until we get a little bit further down in the process of rollout, implementation, and then if there's some desire to revisit the issue at that time, we will do that. So unless there's any questions or thoughts on that, I think that concludes our meeting.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Todd. All right, folks, stay well. Thank you very much.